They called it a little miracle, a narrow, brick front house with a sloping roof and a single crooked chimney, tucked into a sleepy street where streetlights hummed at night and windows blinked like friendly eyes. Sarah pressed her palm against the paint-smudged door and felt, for the first time in years, a calm she hadn't known since she and Ethan were kids dreaming of a future they could afford. Ethan laughed as he tightened a box lid. 2 people, 3 suitcases, and a million plans, he said, voice bright with that reckless optimism that had carried them through the last 3 years of overtime shifts and second jobs. Sarah smiled back, the kind of smile that folds both exhaustion and hope into one look. This house, they agreed, will be the place they stopped running and started living. Inside, the rooms were modest but honest. The living room caught light in the late afternoon and made the dust look like tiny golden feathers. The kitchen held a narrow window that opened onto a small yard, enough for a table, a couple of chairs, and one day, a tiny garden where Sarah promised to plant herbs and a row of geraniums. Ethan could already see a swing under the big maple in the back. Sarah could already imagine Sunday mornings with coffee and low music. They unpacked slowly. Neighbors drifted by with casseroles and smiles. The elderly man next door told them about the best plumber. The woman across the street warned them to keep an eye on the mail, and a little boy raced past with a bike, leaving a line of chalk footprints on the curb. It felt like the world was willing to let them stay. A single white envelope lay among the moving boxes, a standard welcome brochure from the neighborhood association. Ethan tossed it on the counter without a thought. Sarah glanced at it idly, and then got lost in the brassy smell of newly opened boxes and the soft hum of a house that belonged to them at last. That night, as they lay under thin sheets in a bedroom that still smelled faintly of paint, Ethan took Sarah's hand. "We did it," he murmured. The words felt small, fragile, like a candle in the wind, but they held. For the first time, they let themselves dream without counting the costs. Unseen, behind neat hedges and polite smiles, someone else was already taking notes. The envelope was plain, white, and official-looking. It arrived 3 days after Sarah and Ethan had finished unpacking, slipped into their mailbox like an afterthought. Sarah opened it at the kitchen counter, expecting some leftover utility notice. Instead, she read the words, "Friendly reminder, yard maintenance guidelines." Her brow furrowed. The letter stated that grass length must not exceed 3 inches, trash bins must be concealed from street view, and outdoor furniture must conform to approved styles. Sarah looked at Ethan, who was sipping his morning coffee. "It's just a notice," Ethan shrugged. "Every neighborhood has rules. We'll keep up." Sarah folded the paper, but unease tugged at her chest. They hadn't even settled in, yet already someone was watching. That afternoon, as Sarah planted the first sprigs of mint by the backyard fence, she noticed a figure across the street. A woman in her late 50s, hair tied in a severe bun, holding a clipboard. She seemed to study the house, as if every brick carried a hidden fault. Their eyes met briefly, but the woman turned away with a sharp snap of her pen. "Who was that?" Sarah asked the elderly neighbor later. "That," he said quietly, lowering his voice as if the woman could still hear him, "is Mrs. Caldwell, president of the HOA. If she has a clipboard, it means trouble." That evening, Ethan returned home to find Sarah quiet. She showed him the letter, then told him about the woman. Ethan laughed again, trying to dismiss the weight in her voice. "Let's not borrow trouble. It's just bureaucracy. We'll be fine." But Sarah couldn't shake the sense that they were no longer just homeowners. They were being tested, watched, measured against invisible lines they hadn't even known existed. And somewhere behind curtains and closed blinds, Mrs. Caldwell wrote her first notes in neat, cold handwriting. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't friendly. Violation notice. Non-compliance with HOA landscaping standards. Sarah's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Your front garden contains unapproved flora. Immediate removal is required. Failure to comply will result in fines of $200 per week." Unapproved flora? Ethan repeated, baffled. "They're roses, Sarah. Just roses." But Sarah remembered Mrs. Caldwell's clipboard, her calculating eyes scanning every inch of their home. That evening, the couple attended their first HOA meeting at the community hall. Rows of chairs, a long table at the front, and residents seated stiffly as though in a courtroom. Mrs. Caldwell sat in the middle, flanked by two other board members, her gavel tapping the table with unnecessary authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "your front yard does not adhere to approved landscaping. Only evergreen shrubs and specific ground cover are allowed. Roses, though lovely, invite pests and disrupt uniformity." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan placed a hand on hers. He tried reason instead. "Surely there's room for personal expression. It's our home." Mrs. Caldwell's lips curved into something colder than a smile. "It's not just your home, Mr. Walker. It's our community. Rules maintain order. Without them, everything collapses." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors looked away, embarrassed. Others nodded along obediently. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. When they got home, Ethan promised they wouldn't let this ruin their dream. But Sarah sat by the window long into the night, staring at the roses under the porch light. They had survived storms, harsh winters, and years of tender care. Yet here, in a pristine suburban neighborhood, they were now considered illegal. In the shadows across the street, a silhouette stood still, clipboard glinting faintly in the moonlight. Watching, always watching. The next morning, Sarah woke to a loud thud outside. Heart racing, she rushed to the window. Her roses were gone. Every bush, every stem, every bloom, ripped from the soil, roots exposed like torn veins in the earth. The garden was nothing but raw dirt and broken petals scattered like blood on the driveway. Sarah screamed. Ethan ran outside, his fists clenched, his voice breaking. Who did this? Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, none daring to step forward. On the walkway, a folded paper fluttered in the wind. Ethan picked it up. Action executed under HOA authority. Non-compliant vegetation removed. Fine reduced upon compliance. Sarah collapsed to her knees in the dirt, clutching the broken stems like they were the bones of a loved one. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "These were my mother's roses. She planted them with me when I was a girl. They were all I had left of her." Her sobs echoed through the quiet street. Ethan held her, his jaw tight with fury. For the first time, he saw it clearly. This wasn't about rules or order or community. This was about control. That evening, he returned to the HOA office demanding answers. But Mrs. Caldwell sat tall, her voice calm, almost satisfied. "Mr. Walker," she said coolly, "we simply enforce the standards. Your wife's sentimentality cannot override the rules. If she cannot adjust, perhaps this community is not right for you." Ethan's fists shook at his sides. He wanted to shout, to break something, to rip away that smug mask she wore. But Sarah's fragile state held him back. He stormed out, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any storm. At home, Sarah sat on the porch, her hands stained with dirt, her eyes vacant. The roses were gone, but the memory of their fragrance lingered like a ghost, haunting every breath she took. For the first time, their dream home felt like a prison. Weeks passed, but the wound never healed. Sarah stopped tending the yard. She stopped smiling. Even her laughter, once the heartbeat of the home, grew quiet. Every time she looked at the barren soil, she saw her mother's hands planting those roses beside her as a little girl. She remembered her mother's soft voice. "These flowers will always remind you that love can bloom anywhere." Now, only emptiness remained. Ethan tried everything to bring her comfort. New flowers, weekend trips, gentle reassurances, but nothing worked. It wasn't about the roses anymore. It was about something deeper, something stolen. One autumn evening, Sarah placed a small framed photograph of her mother on the porch railing. She lit a candle beside it, the flame flickering in the crisp night air. Ethan sat silently beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "I don't want to fight anymore," Sarah whispered. "I just wanted a home where love could grow. But this place, it only kills." Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell watched from her window, her face an unreadable mask. Perhaps she felt triumph. perhaps guilt, but she did not look away. The next morning, a for sale sign appeared in front of the Walker's house. Sarah and Ethan's dream was gone, crushed under the weight of rules and power games. As they drove away weeks later, Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The house stood cold, sterile, perfect. The roses were gone, but in her lap lay a single bloom, one Ethan had secretly saved, its petals pressed between the pages of a book. She touched it gently, and for the first time in months, a tear rolled down her cheek that wasn't from pain, but from memory. The roses were gone, but love, fragile and defiant, still lived on. And behind them, in that perfect neighborhood, the HOA stood waiting for its next victim.